Once upon a time, in the quiet village of Amakporo, surrounded by thick palm forests and flowing streams, there lived a mysterious young man named Chakudi. He was not from the village. He arrived one cool evening during the New Yam festival. Nobody knew where he came from, but his handsome face, smooth skin, and deep voice captivated everyone. The women, both married and single, could not resist his charm. Chakudi was always polite and respectful, greeting the elders with a low bow and helping the children fetch water from the stream. But it was the women he paid special attention to. He had a way of speaking that made their hearts flutter. Whenever he walked through the market, the women selling tomatoes and peppers would giggle like young girls, forgetting they were married mothers. Mama Nkechi, the village gossiper, was the first to notice something strange. This Chakudi is not ordinary," she whispered to her neighbor. "How can one man make all the women in the village laugh like small children?" But nobody took her seriously. They said she was just jealous because her own daughter, Nkechi, couldn't stop talking about him. Soon, strange things began to happen. One by one, the women in the village discovered they were pregnant. At first, it seemed normal. After all, the men in the village were hardworking farmers, and pregnancy was common. But then, even women who hadn't been with their husbands for months started swelling up. Mama Chidinma, a widow who had been alone since her husband's death 5 years ago, was the first to realize something was wrong. "How can I be pregnant?" she cried one morning, holding her stomach. "It is not possible." But the midwives checked her and confirmed it, she was with child. The same thing happened to Adebi, the chief's daughter, and Oluchi, the pastor's wife. Even young girls who had never been with a man before began to notice changes in their bodies. The entire village was in confusion. It was Neka, the herbalist, who finally connected the dots. One evening, as the women gathered around her hut to discuss the mystery, she raised her hand to silence them. "All of you," she began, her eyes scanning their faces, "have something in common. Tell me, who has spent time alone with Chakudi?" At first, they hesitated, but one by one, they admitted it. Some had met him by the river, others had shared a quiet moment under the big Iroko tree. Neka's face grew dark. "This is not an ordinary man," she declared. "Something evil is at work here." The women agreed to confront Chakudi the next day, but before they could act, Neka had a dream. In the dream, she saw Chakudi sitting by the river, his body half human, half snake. His lower half was a giant serpent, its scales glistening in the moonlight. When Neka woke up, her heart was pounding. The next morning, she called the women together. "We must catch him at the river," she said. "That is where his true form will be revealed." The women, trembling with fear but determined to uncover the truth, gathered at Neka's hut at dusk. They carried palm fronds, pots of water blessed with herbs, and charms for protection. Neka led the group, her staff in hand, as they made their way to the river under the cover of darkness. The moon hung high, casting its silver light on the flowing water. The river was silent except for the occasional croak of frogs and the chirping of crickets. As they approached, they saw Chakudi sitting on a rock by the riverbank, humming a strange melody. He didn't notice them at first, and for a moment, the women hesitated. He looked so harmless, so human. But Neka raised her staff and whispered, "This is no man. Watch." She muttered an incantation and blew a fine powder toward him. Chakudi's head snapped up, and his eyes glowed a piercing yellow. His smile faded, replaced by a look of pure rage. The women gasped as his lower body began to change. His legs fused together, his skin turned scaly, and before their eyes, his body transformed into a giant snake. "You dare to expose me," he hissed, his voice echoing unnaturally. The women shrieked, some dropping their pots of water in fear. But Neka stood firm, chanting words that seemed to make Chakudi writhe in pain. "Who are you?" Neka demanded. "Why have you cursed our village?" Chakudi laughed, his voice cold and sinister. You humans are foolish, he said. I am Izenwa, the spirit of the river. I was cast out from the spirit world, and I took this form to walk among you. The children in your wombs are my heirs, my way of spreading my power. You cannot stop what has already begun. The women cried out in horror. Neka raised her staff again, but Chakudi, no, Izenwa, slithered into the river, disappearing beneath the surface. The water churned violently before settling back into silence. The women stared at each other, their faces pale with fear. What do we do now? Adiabi whispered. Neka's voice was steady, but her expression was grave. We must prepare. This is only the beginning. The village women returned in silence, their hearts weighed down with dread. News of what they had seen spread quickly through Amakporo. The men, who had been confused and worried about the sudden pregnancies, now knew the truth, but they didn't know how to react. Snake spirit, muttered Okafor, the village hunter, as the men gathered at the square to discuss. How can we fight something that lives in the river? Spears cannot pierce water. Fight, asked Obi, the blacksmith. Do you know what we are dealing with? Spirits are not like humans. If we attack blindly, we'll bring more trouble on ourselves. The chief, an elderly man named Ichi Okari, raised his hand for silence. His face was grave. This matter is not for men to solve, he said. The spirit has targeted our women, and it is their fight to lead. We can only protect them where we can. The decision unsettled the men, but nobody dared challenge the chief's wisdom. Meanwhile, Neka stayed awake deep into the night, mixing herbs and chanting prayers to the gods of the land. She knew Izenwa would not give up so easily. As the spirit of the river, he had claimed dominance over the village, and his intentions for the unborn children remained unclear. The pregnant women, on the other hand, started to experience strange symptoms. Their stomachs grew larger than usual, and they reported feeling sharp movements inside them, like snakes slithering. Some of the women began to have dreams, visions of the river, of Izenwa calling to them, promising them power and riches if they accepted their fate. Mama Chidinma was the first to confess. In my dream, Izenwa came to me, she said, sitting in Neka's hut with trembling hands. He told me the child in my womb is destined to rule over this village. He said I should not fight him, or my family will suffer. Others nodded. They too had seen him in their dreams. Neka's face darkened as she listened. He is trying to break you, she said. Do not listen to him. His promises are lies. We must stay strong together. But cracks were beginning to form. Some women started avoiding the meetings, isolating themselves and refusing to speak of their dreams. Mama Nkechi, always the loudest voice, started whispering that perhaps the river spirit was not the enemy but a misunderstood god. What if he's here to bless us, not curse us, she said to a group of women by the stream one morning. Before long, the village was divided. Some believed Neka and wanted to fight back, while others started secretly worshipping Izenwa, leaving offerings by the river to appease him. The tension grew worse with each passing day, and the river's waters, once clear and calm, began to turn murky and restless. Then, one night, the first of the children was born. It was Oluchi, the pastor's wife, who went into labor. The village midwives gathered to help her, but as the cries of the newborn filled the air, a chilling silence followed. The women came running out of her hut, their faces pale with terror. What is it? Neka demanded, rushing toward them. The midwives could barely speak. The child, one of them whispered. It has scales. The village of Amakporo plunged into chaos after the birth of Oluchi's child. Word spread quickly, the baby had shimmering scales covering its skin and slit-like yellow eyes, just like the snake spirit Izenwa. The men and women gathered at Oluchi's hut, fearful yet curious to see the child. Some called it an abomination, while others whispered that it might truly be a blessing from the river spirit. Oluchi herself was caught between horror and a strange affection for her child. "He may not look like other children," she told her husband, "but he is still mine." Her husband, however, could not accept the truth. He left the hut that night and did not return. Over the next few weeks, more women began giving birth, and all their children bore the same traits: scales, yellow eyes, and unusually sharp cries that sounded more like hisses. The village elders convened a meeting, and Ichi Okari, the chief, spoke gravely. "These children are not human," he said. "Izenwa's plan is clear. He seeks to take over our village through these offspring." Neka agreed. "We must perform a powerful cleansing ritual to break Izenwa's hold on these children and banish his spirit from our village." But not everyone supported this plan. Mama Nkechi and her group, who had grown loyal to Izenwa, protested. "These children are a gift," she shouted. "You cannot kill them." The village split into two fractions: those who wanted to fight Izenwa and those who believed the children were meant to bring prosperity. Tensions rose until one night, under the full moon, Izenwa himself appeared at the river bank. His towering serpent form glistened in the moonlight as he called out to the villagers who had gathered there. "Why do you fight against me?" he boomed. "I have given you my children, heirs of the river. They will bring you wealth, power, and protection. Reject them, and you will face my wrath." Neka stepped forward, her staff glowing with the light of the herbs she had prepared. "You cannot deceive us, Izenwa," she said boldly. "These children are not gifts, they are your tools to enslave us. Tonight, we will end your reign." Neka began chanting, calling on the gods of the land and water to bind Izenwa's spirit. The loyalists to Izenwa tried to stop her, but the villagers who stood with Neka held them back. As the chant grew louder, the river began to bubble and churn. Izenwa roared in anger, lashing out with his serpent tail, but he could not approach Neka. Her power was too strong. Finally, with a deafening cry, Izenwa dissolved into the water, his form disappearing into mist. The river calmed, and an eerie silence fell over the village. The children, too, began to change. Their scales faded, their eyes turned normal, and their cries softened. They became human once again. The village rejoiced, but the victory came at a cost. Many families were torn apart by the conflict, and some women who had aligned with Izenwa were shunned. The elders declared that rituals of protection would be performed regularly to prevent any future spirits from invading their land. The children grew up healthy, but their origins were never forgotten. They became a symbol of the village's resilience and served as a reminder of the danger of giving in to temptation. The river remained calm, but no one dared approach it without first seeking Neka's blessing. The village learned to respect their traditions and remain united, knowing that division only made them vulnerable to evil forces. Neka's bravery and knowledge saved the village, showing the power of standing up against wrongdoing. And so, Amakporo returned to peace, forever marked by the events that taught them the value of unity, vigilance, and wisdom. Thank you for watching, and please help support us by subscribing and sharing this video so that we create more videos like this. And don't forget to leave a comment below of your thoughts.